We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 168 for July 17th, 2019. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about lodging. So pack your bags and clean your toothbrush because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today are Doug in Scotland.
Hey, everyone.
And East Coast Bill in Maryland.
Hey there.
All right, so let's get this rolling. If the others join us, they do. If they don't, they don't. But otherwise, you can always join us as a listener by sending in an email, chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com, or you can tweet at arcpodnet. Plus, the Twitter handles for all of our hosts are on the show notes over at arcpodnet.com/CRM Arc podcast. Okay, so there's been a lot of talk lately on the socials about lodging, especially as we're getting into the field season. And we're pretty much square right in the middle of the field season at this point as we record this in early to mid-July. And it's something we've mentioned before is some of these lodging things. And actually one post in particular brought this back to the forefront. And it was something about per diem and companies, basically the old trope of companies saying, here, we're going to put you in this lodging and we're going to pocket the balance of the per diem, which is, not something that they're actually doing. You got to look at the bigger picture on that, but we're not going to get into that too much. What we're going to talk about are, I guess, alternative lodging methods and things like Airbnb and other vacation rental spots. I remember before Airbnb was even a thing, we stayed on Curry Beach in North Carolina for a project in Wilmington, North Carolina, because it was off season and it was ultimately cheaper for us to get like this three-story, I guess townhouses or condos. I don't know. They were 3 stories, garage down below, plus a room down there. And then like a kitchen and living area on the middle floor. And then the top floor had 3 bedrooms and 2 or 3 bathrooms. I can't remember. And it was really nice. It was ultimately cheaper for the company, cheaper for us. And it was really great being right across the street from the beach while we were working. And that was a good thing. And that was done through a vacation rental place, not something like Airbnb. A lot of those coastal things are not on Airbnb. They're through these vacation rental programs. So in fact, I just got back from one in North Carolina yesterday as we're recording this. So anyway, what are your guys' initial thoughts? And we'll start with Bill in Maryland, since you're in this country dealing with these things right now. What are your initial thoughts on field techs using things like Airbnb, or you as a project manager finding Airbnbs for your crews? I mean, is that something that you're considering when you're thinking about all this stuff these days?
Actually, typically, no. With most of the projects I work on sort of here in the East Coast, there's an abundance normally, unless you, like you say, are at a sort of a beach environment of hotels, motels, and things like that. And typically it's going to be sort of your, it's sort of your old trope of CRM. It's sort of the cheapest motel they can find with the doors on the outside. And there may be the people in the parking lot who are sitting on lawn chairs as you're driving in and out, and maybe always not necessarily the nicest places on there. So in theory, would definitely like the idea of the Airbnb thing, especially for like a situation you're talking about. There is like there's not going to be other sort of like hotel accommodations closer. You can get an entire house with that. I did that. Take that back. I did do that once. It was a project up in Cape Cod, and it was hard to get hotels on Cape Cod in the middle of the summer. So we were staying at a house, and that worked out well. I think the only concern I would have with those types of accommodations would be the same type of concerns I'd have with any accommodations. Are you trying to do things like double up rooms? Are you trying to do things like, not give everyone a chance for sort of their private space? Because the thing with, at least what I always look at when you're looking at traveling out of town is you're only paying these people for when they're in the field. The other time is still their time. Yes, you've taken them away from home and have taken away the opportunity to do whatever they would normally do during their off time. So respecting the privacy of people, or the need of privacy of people during their off hours, I think is important. Not everyone is going to want to be part of the super chummy, let's turn this into sort of a mini vacation type of thing. People are, some people are professionals, they like to do their work, and they sometimes don't like to see their coworkers until the next morning, and that's perfectly fine. So that would be my only thought on that kind of like group setting.
Well, of course, I definitely want to talk about this during this podcast, but my preference is always let the field tech sort it out. And I know that companies and especially certain project managers, things like that, have their own thoughts behind that because they're like, we want everybody in the same place at the same time, so we know everybody's going to be there. But again, we've talked about that a lot on the show about opinions around that. So let's just take that out of the equation for right now. But looking at, say, the Airbnb thing, like, for example, this house that we were in last week. Now, of course, this house is way more expensive than something we'd ever stay in for CRM because we were literally right on the ocean and we had a swimming pool and the house had an elevator. I mean, that's not the kind of thing you're going to find in your typical Airbnb. However, the type of house is something you can find all over the East Coast. And I say the East Coast because it feels like they're more populated, more focused around tourism in general, up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And finding a house that has, 4 or 5 bedrooms where each bedroom has its own TV, its own cable system, its own bathroom and shower. If you have your own bathroom and your own TV and there's decent enough internet in the house, I personally think, and I'm one that likes their personal space. I sometimes don't want to see anybody after work, but if I can go in there and I don't have to see anybody after work, I can still pull out my cooking stuff in my room if I want and never come out, because if I have a TV and a bathroom and a bed, that's basically a hotel room. But if I want to use a full kitchen, if I want to go use the other amenities of the house, well, then I have those available to me. And as long as the other guests, the other coworkers are being respectful of, curfew times and things like that. I don't mean curfew, but, like being quiet after a certain hour, stuff like that, and like not playing really loud music or TV or something, not having a huge party up until, 1 o'clock in the morning on a work night, then I'm personally fine with it, which is somewhat shocking to me because early in my career, I never would have done that. And I had to do that sometimes, but I wouldn't have done it. But what do you think about that? Like, if you're getting the same amenities of a hotel room in a single room of a house, but then you have the other flexibility of the rest of the house, like the refrigerator, the kitchen, all those other things you get with a house. I don't know. That seems pretty sweet.
No, that does. I mean, that's definitely like sort of going to the other end. I was saying, as long as those other things are sort of in place, yeah, that sounds like a perfect solution for things. I mean, there's sort of other factors. I've worked for bigger companies, and one of the bigger factors is that typically your travel is not being set by you. It's somebody up in corporate or HR or some other department, and they have set up certain arrangements with travel companies or with hotel chains themselves where they can have pre-negotiated rates and things like that, and they prefer to use those companies. They will, it's one of those weird things is like, just to throw a name out there, like it has to be a Quality Inn chain because we get better discounts with them. So we'll end up being 45 minutes from the project area, even though there were 3 hotels 20 minutes from the project area, but they weren't with our preferred hotel vendor. So we're going to drive further to get so that someone in the company can get their cheaper rate that they've negotiated. So there's always that kind of weirdness when it comes to travel too. The logic of travel of like how close you are to the site versus how cheap the company needs to be. And I want to put it that way, not is, but needs to be, because these are all budgeted things, and most like everything else with a CRM budget, it's most likely under budget. Where they've bid under what the actual costs are. So to not lose your shirt, you have to make, accommodate, you have to get everyone into a room, but that room needs to be as cheap as possible before you lose your shirt.
Yeah. I mean, if you didn't bid the project with a certain amount of per diem, whether you're giving that to the field crews directly or not, but if you didn't bid it for the for the location that you're at and the housing prices and, and just what the actual cost of living is where the project area is, man, you're just shooting yourselves in the foot, and I'd like to think that most companies are not doing that. Most companies are not doing that, at least on a regular basis. Maybe that happens sometimes when you get a new project manager that's trying to win something and they're like, oh, we always use $90 a day per diem. But it turns out hotels in this new town that we have never worked in before, $150 a day in the summertime, something like that. Not looking at the seasonality of hotel costs or Airbnb or something like that and not paying attention to that when they're actually bidding the project. Or I've seen it before, bidding a project that isn't going to happen for 6 months. They bid it for today's prices, and in 6 months, like you're bidding it in January or December, but the project isn't actually going to go down until the summertime when prices are higher. If you're in a touristy area where prices always go up in the summertime, or even like in the wintertime. Prices go up, say around Lake Tahoe up here in the wintertime. Not that you can work outside in archaeology at Lake Tahoe in the winter, but you get my point. There's high seasons and low seasons for places. And if you don't plan for that, you're screwed.
To add to that, Chris, also, think about where you are in the project development phase. So if you're out to be doing monitoring, then that means you're probably going to be out there with a bunch of the construction crew as well. I've seen projects where it looks fine, and you're usually there before any of the bulldozers come in, so you don't have to worry about that. But on some big road schemes and stuff like that, especially when you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's always good to take into account that if you're doing, like, say, monitoring work or anything, that you're going to be there with the construction guys. They're going to need places too, and that can quickly take up everything. And they usually are paid a lot more, so they can basically outbid you for any hotels or accommodation. So it's another thing for anyone who's listening to this who's going to be in that situation at some point. Make sure you know where in the project development phase you are, because you might be competing against your own, not quite coworkers, but I guess, I don't know, other contractors on the project.
Sure.
Yeah.
Doug, while we're still in this segment, I'm pretty sure we have talked about this a number of times, but over in Scotland, I'm curious as to the lodging requirements for projects. And I believe you said before, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that a lot of times, quite frankly, because the area is so small and there's enough companies or archaeological units, as they call them out in the UK, working out there, that you don't really need to travel too much for work. But when people do have to travel, what's the lodging situation look like for an archaeologist in the UK?
Yeah, so there's the Central Belt, which is Edinburgh and Glasgow, and that's the sort of lowlands. And usually, 2-hour drive gets you to England, or pretty much covers most of the places in that area. So you're just going from your home base out to the job. But the Highlands, you basically have to, they're not that far, but the roads aren't great. It's a different type of remoteness, a remoteness where you're only 50 miles away, but it takes you 2 or 3 hours to get there, maybe more. And with the Highlands, you don't really have, unless you get to one of the bigger cities like Aberdeen or Inverness, there's no chain hotels. So essentially what you're looking for is B&Bs or holiday. Basically, it's anything, because, during the summer, also you can't really do work during tourist season. So between, June and September-ish, if you haven't booked a year and ahead, you're going to be suffering. But yeah, it's basically just a bunch of B&Bs. It's a lot more cottage industry. There are some sort of bigger hotels, but they tend to be like a certain type of tourist. It's hard to describe, but what was it that movie, Grand Budapest or whatever? Where it's sort of older clientele who tend to be well off and big fancy places. You can actually occasionally during the off season end up in a place like that, depending where you're at. But other than that, it's usually just, B&Bs, and you could do Airbnbs, but it's a toss up. My preference is actually for if you can manage it to actually get like a B&B, because you then get breakfast included. It's not something you have to worry about depending on, what time you have to be on site and stuff.
Right.
So
I'll tell you, my wife and I, when we came out and saw you out there actually for the EAAs when they were there, 4 or 5 years ago now, we got there, 5 days, I think, before the conference started. So we got there whatever Saturday that was before the conference started and rented a car out of the airport in Edinburgh. And we just decided to drive. We had decided this early, but we decided we were going to drive basically up towards Aberdeen and then go counterclockwise around the country there. And the only place that we had planned ahead of time before we left the USA was the first night. And I can't remember even where that was. It was that town with the bridge, the fifth or something or other. It's a huge bridge. I don't know what it was. Anyway, we stayed in this one little place, and it was somebody's residence and they lived there. So it was just a room, and she made us breakfast in the morning, which was great. And then a couple of nights, and then every time after that, we just decided we would drive, and in the morning we would decide where we were going to stay for the night based on what we wanted to see. So we didn't plan anything out, and it was all through Airbnb too. We didn't stay in any chain hotels, nothing. Not even when we got to Glasgow, we had that Airbnb, Doug, that you saw, that we were staying in Glasgow, and it was pretty great because you're right. All the bed and breakfasts up there are really great. You get breakfast in the morning. It's just a really nice place. All the rooms are nice. Everything's kind of different depending on where you stay. And all the B&Bs, I think, are on Airbnb. So if you look really closely on Airbnb, and you find this on the West Coast here in the United States too, you drive up and down the coast, there's a lot of bed and breakfasts that are now on Airbnb as another way to find one of their rooms. And I don't think we paid more than $90 to $100 US. I don't remember what the conversion was into euros, but I don't think we paid more than about $90 to $100 US for any one night. And that was getting it on the day that we were going to be staying there. And I think it was in September, and it was pretty great. It was pretty great. Now, of course, we were staying in some pretty small areas where I don't think there were a lot of people. We'd find these really tiny towns and just these little things that weren't even towns and just some place that's on our route that we're taking, especially when we were up through the Highlands. I don't know. It was an amazing way to, I guess, take a vacation, and I really liked it. It made me really think about traveling around like that for archaeology and finding little places like this, and how awesome it would be to, to stay in these unique circumstances and not in a crappy, dime hotel or whatever on the side of the road. So anyway, I blathered on to the end of the segment. So let's take our first break and come back and continue this discussion about alternative lodging, Airbnbs, and all the other stuff. Back in a minute. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRM Arch. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode. All right, welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 168, where we're talking about lodging, Airbnbs, and such. And Doug, you had some thoughts on B&Bs and Airbnbs.
Yeah, it was actually a comment off of something you had mentioned in the last segment, which is you said, a lot of the smaller B&Bs were actually on Airbnb. Mm-hmm. And that is a trend I'm seeing more and more as the years go along. Is a lot of places, they may be like a B&B, they may even be a chain hotel, all sorts of different ranges. A lot of apartments and stuff are now going on to those bigger websites, those sort of aggregate hotels and places to stay. So Expedia or hotels.com or bookings.com, or, there's probably like, I don't know, several hundred of those. But it is now that a lot of those sites are not just hotels. So if you are looking for an apartment or are looking for a B&B or something, you actually have a lot more options now when you go through those sort of aggregate sites. And the reason I mention this is because I like to go through those sites because of points. So I use hotels.com a lot where it fits in the budget, and there's other considerations that go into it. But if I can, I use that because it's an average, but after 10 nights of staying, you get a night free. Yeah. So it's a good way to build up and be able to like pay for holidays outside of work by having work pay for it, basically, or at least part of it. So, and a lot of hotel chains as well have sort of point-based systems and various things like that. But it depends on the company you're working for, the project. It's a whole bunch of factors. But if you are given the chance to be able to find your own accommodation, I highly recommend trying to go with something that can give you points. And like I sort of go through like a hierarchy. So not my first priority, but if I can do like a hotels.com. And then after that, I start looking at things like location and then breakfast as well. What are your guys' sort of like, if you do get the option to choose accommodation, either as a project manager or working for someone else, what is your sort of, I guess, hierarchy or your must-haves, or how do you guys break it out and try to find accommodation? This is assuming that like you actually have the option and it's not like some town in the middle of nowhere and there's one place to stay, and that makes it easy.
Yeah. I mean, when I do a project, I actually prefer hotels because it's sort of like everybody's sort of in the same place. But I guess, a good Airbnb where everyone's in the same place is there. I'm looking for a place that's going to have good free internet, so that I can continue my, office work. Because when you're out in the field as a project manager, your reports and other things don't stop because you're in the field. So having good access to good internet is in place. I do like the places with free breakfast. It saves a trip in the morning, especially if you're starting like 6:30, 7:30 in the morning, kind of early or late, and you sort of take that there. Plus, it always works out well, at least for the projects I work on, because they're not terribly long. They're maybe a week, 3 weeks max. So you get a crew van together, and it's already there at the hotel, and you can sort of meet everybody downstairs for breakfast, and everybody just hops into the van and you drive out to the site. So from my selfish point of view, it's sort of the easiest and laziest way for me to work it out there. I'm sure crew would have much different opinions on that, but from like, being the sort of one running the field project, that's just always nice because everything's there. I know where everyone's at, but you still have your sort of private space.
Yeah, I think my must-haves are definitely internet, microwave, and fridge. If it doesn't have those things, then I wouldn't even stay there. I mean, those are just like quality of life issues at this point. You need to have a way to cook and store your food. And a lot of people might have coolers. They might have, other ways that they're cooking, and that's fine. But I think for just basics, just to keep yourself happy, having those three things are essential to life these days. Some of my nice to haves are a swimming pool. It's really nice in the summertime to have a pool sometimes. Just jump in and go for a swim and hang out with the crew and do that. Not a must have, but definitely a nice to have. Breakfast is a tricky one because while I don't mind hotel breakfast, especially if they have some like fruit options and things like that, because a lot of times the breakfast will just make me sick throughout the day if I eat it because it's not the best breakfast.
They're not the best options. You get what you paid for. Free. Exactly.
But here's the problem. A lot of times we're starting before breakfast is served, and you have to take that into account when you're saying, I chose this place because they have a great breakfast, but breakfast starts at 7 and we're leaving at 6. Out here in the Great Basin, we will often leave real early in the summertime because of the heat later on in the day. So we might have a day that starts at 5, 6 o'clock just because of that. And we'll never get to breakfast. Like, for example, I'm going on a project tomorrow and I have to be at the mine that I'm going to on Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., which means I've got to leave the hotel at 4:30 in the morning just to get up there. And the hotel has a breakfast, but I, of course, didn't plan on that because I always stay in that hotel for this project. However, the Starbucks opens at 3:30. So, I've got my bases covered.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other nice to haves that I like to say, and it's almost a must have depending on like the length of the project, because some people have a lot of stuff, right? Like they just bring in a truckload of things, and a nice to have is an elevator, even if it's only a 2-floor hotel or something like that. But if it's, you get like a 3-floor walk up and you've got to hoof it up those stairs and they don't have an elevator, which I've been in before, and they assign you that top room. I almost always ask for the bottom room just because, I don't care. I'm tired enough at the end of the night that I don't care about people walking over me.
I mean, especially if you're like, the crew chief for the field. So you're in charge of the big bucket of water and the transit and whatever else expensive, the trembles and any other expensive piece of equipment that you have to take out of the van every single night. And lug up to your room. So elevators are a lifesaver.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and a comment on points that you were mentioning earlier, Doug. Hotels.com. I can't agree more. I mean, I've had several free nights already this year because I book literally everything through Hotels.com. I look at Airbnb first because I like the idea of having an entire house. And I don't even do rooms anymore. It's just too much of a pain in the ass. You never know what you're going to get. I can't have that variability in my travel unless it's like just a quick overnight. I'll book a room or something. But if I'm staying there longer than one night and I'm going to be out there for a little while, I need the whole house, even if it's just me. I want that space. And you can often find that in small towns for the same price as a hotel room. You're getting somebody's entire residence, which is pretty nice. But when I can't find something on Airbnb that fits the bill, I immediately go to hotels.com, and I really don't look anywhere else because I've never not had luck with hotels.com. And it keeps you coming back because, like you said, Doug, you get the free nights. And to elaborate on that a little more, Doug alluded to it, but it's an average of the past 10 nights. So you stay 10 nights, and let's say, the average cost of a hotel you were getting was $60, $70, $80. It's probably going to be on the mid to lower end of that, but that's what your quote free night is going to be. And you can apply it to it. So you can go get a $150 hotel room and they'll take your free night, which is basically like a $70 credit if that's what your average was, and apply it to that night. And you can choose to apply it or not. You can save it up. And you can stack them up too and use them for whatever you want, which is really great. And you might be able to double dip on points. But some hotels don't allow that if it's not booked through their website. If it's booked through hotels.com, they won't allow you to get points through them as well. So if you are, say, getting a Marriott hotel or something like that through hotels.com, you might be able to get the Marriott points and the hotels.com free night at the same time, and then double dip on those. Always check and see if the chain hotel has a points program, because even if you never use them, it's free to sign up. You can turn off all their BS emails that they send you and just rack up the points. The points expire at some point, but it's just a nice to have in case you happen to be, racking those up and it works out, because you're guaranteed to have the hotels.com ones, which also do expire, by the way. Don't forget that. Your free nights expire at hotels.com. Anyway, those are some good things.
Yeah, I think the expiration on the hotels is you have to book within a year. So you either have to book a new place or use your whatever point your free room or rooms or whatever. So it's not too bad. It gives you a bit of chance to do that. I guess also another thing to sort of be considerate about is, and I guess this gets into sort of an ethical issue, is when, like, say you book it for your entire crew and stuff, and you get the points. And some people will have, say, I don't know, a Holiday Inn card or a Quality Inn, or, those different chains will have rewards cards as well. Not all of them. Some of them do, some don't. And then, your crew members would like to collect the points as well for their stay. And I've seen different ways of doing this, and I don't know. I guess I'd like to see your guys' opinion on it, because I'm a bit torn, like in the sense of if you're putting together the project and you're doing all the work to book the accommodation and everything, yeah, I can understand why you'd want the points. But then it is also a nice thing to, if one of your crew would like to gain points as well, and they're the ones who are actually staying, to allow them to use their card and their points or their membership number. What are you guys' opinions on that?
You know, my thoughts on really the hotel points, not like hotels.com or anything like that, is if the company's paying for it and they're not giving you that per diem, if that wasn't like a collective decision, if they're just giving you food per diem and saying we're covering lodging, well, I don't think it's unethical for the company to keep the points. I don't think it's because they can use those points for something else later on. Maybe they'll get a break on some rooms. I don't know. I don't even care. If you've agreed to work on a project where you're not getting lodging per diem, but your lodging is getting paid for, it's out of your hands from that point. It's up to the company to decide what the lodging is and all that stuff. As long as you're okay with it, you're still going to work there. But you know, you can go from there. Now, I did work on a project in Tampa, Florida. I think it was with Janus Research or something. It was actually not even in Tampa. It was out in the middle of the state somewhere. But we were staying at a Holiday Inn Express, which was really nice, but there was nowhere else to stay. Like there was some golf course and they put up this Holiday Inn Express and that was like the only place we could stay. So, but one of the cool things they did was if you had a Holiday Inn points system, they would put you in the rotation. So we stayed out there 4 nights a week because it was Monday through Friday. So Monday night through Thursday night. And each week of the project, they would rotate it around and they would put somebody else's points in because I guess the company didn't know how or wasn't concerned with using the points. So they said, well, if you have a number, give it to us. So you got all the points for that week for all the rooms, which was pretty great. I don't know if I ever even used those points, to be honest, but it was nice that they did that. And I'd never seen that approach before or since. So,
yeah. So weird for me on the points thing, because for the most part, I'm a local. Being close to the Baltimore, D.C. area, most of my projects are local projects. So I was just thinking about like last year, I think I spent 5 weeks in a hotel only during the course of that. So things like point. I mean, for me, it's more the rental car points that I accumulate for renting the crew vehicles and things like that on projects is where my point action gets into play. But I would definitely tend to agree with what Chris is talking about. Like if you aren't putting money out of your pocket, if the company is already prepaid, as far as you're concerned, your entire lodging on there, I wouldn't think there'd be an expectation that you got points on it. I mean, if you could find some way to get points, I would consider that a bonus. But I would go under this sort of gray area of it borderlines on an entitlement, feeling entitled. If you're thinking you should get points for traveling on a place you didn't pay for. If you get it, you should be grateful for it. But if you aren't paying out of your pocket first, I would have no expectations on getting those. That's sort of how I go with sort of all things travel. If you're putting the money up front, then yes, you should get something from it. But if you're not, you're not. That's your benefit. It's not having to potentially put money on your credit card and wait for your per diem check to come back in a couple weeks.
So here's something else along those lines, since this is apparently the points segment. Let's just keep it rolling. One of the things you can try to do, even if the company is paying for the hotel room and they're paying for it with their credit card, the hotel room's in your name, right? More often than not, they have to put the hotel room in your name. So when you check in, you're like, hey, I've got a room for blah, 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 paid for by the company. Some hotels and some front desk people, if you're not a jerk to them, will go ahead and put your number in there if you ask them. If the company hasn't already done that, because a lot of companies don't even consider, they deal with so much stuff and it's just too much of a hassle for them to worry about points. I don't even know how you deal with points from an accounting standpoint. How do you deal with free rooms or turning those points into cash to pay the bill or something? I don't know. So a lot of them, they just don't even worry about it. They're in a points hotel, but they're not collecting the points. So it doesn't hurt to just go down to the front desk and say, hey, I have a Marriott card or I have a Wyndham card or whatever the hell the thing is, and just give them your points. And you may or may not get those. A lot of times they just don't care and you can get the points. So
yeah, no, I would say, be nice to your front desk person and see if that can happen. But I wouldn't cause a stink at the front desk, and I sure as hell wouldn't call the whole home office and demand, the company do something. It's one of those things. Yeah. If you can do it, consider that a bonus, but don't feel entitled. Don't feel entitled to something like that.
Yeah. The other way you can get points, especially if you're booking your own lodging, and you can triple dip on points this way, is so the first dip is hotels.com. That's giving you free nights if you're booking through there. The second one is if you book through hotels.com and the hotel lets you use their point system, then you get 2 sets of points right there. You're building it in 2 different categories. The third way, of course, is to use a credit card that gets you points, airline miles, whatever you want it to be. But book all that stuff with that card, and then you're just you're piling on all these extras. And if you're a real savvy field technician, and you're booking all your own lodging and you're doing that stuff, I mean, you're basically funding your own vacation in the wintertime or whenever you want to take it. Because let's be honest, you don't have to ask anyone to take vacation. You can literally take vacation whenever you want, in the best time of year, in your favorite time of year, whatever it is. You make the call, and you can use all 3 of those different points type systems to basically fund your entire, at least the lodging portion of your vacation. And in some cases, even the flight, if say the credit card is earning you airline miles.
Okay, I will full disclosure here. I am one of the worst when it comes to sort of like navigating the travel system with points and things like that. It's
hard to manage.
So I am like, in addition to talking here and giving my 2 cents, I'm also taking notes so that I can help improve my own travel situation on here. So there's things to be learned here, folks.
That's right.
So that's why you need to listen to every episode with a pen and paper in your hand, unless you're driving. Then have the passenger take notes for you.
That's right. No, this whole system is complicated because there's people out there that just like they make it their job to game the whole airline travel hotel points system. And there's a link that I'll put in the show notes it's basically a blog, and you got to watch it because they often have a lot of sponsored stuff because they really get in with some of these companies. So, but they're pretty good about saying, hey, this is a sponsored item here. We actually get something if you click on this link. They're pretty good about that, but it's called The Points Guy. And it was just this guy that started basically doing all this airline travel. And now he's the go-to person for saying, okay, what's this big deal? I actually got a new credit card one time and shut off a couple others because I saw on his blog this thing. It was actually from Wells Fargo, and I have Wells Fargo as my bank, so it kind of worked out. But it was like a 2-year interest-free balance transfer credit card, and then you got points if you transferred into the balance. So I ended up with like a 75,000 point balance on my American Airlines Advantage thing because it was linked in through that. Plus, I was able to transfer another credit card over that didn't have the lowest interest rate around. I think it was like 13 or 14%. It wasn't that good. And put that on this other credit card that is now being paid off. And it was pretty great. And I found that out by paying attention to this guy. I follow him on Facebook. So I see all the little articles they post right through my feed. And then he's got the blog, and it's just called The Points Guy. So check that out. And I'll put the link in the show notes for this episode. So, all right. That's the end of this segment. Doug, we'll get to your comments in segment 3, and we'll wrap up this discussion of hotels and alternative lodging and all the points. Back in a minute. You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show. All right, welcome back to the final segment of the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 168. We're wrapping up this discussion on hotels and Airbnbs and points and all kinds of things. And Doug, I think right as I was ending the last segment, you had something to chime in on.
Yeah, it was actually something you guys had sort of mentioned, but just to flesh it out a little bit more, is when you're getting points, and this goes to East Coast, Bill, is it depends, again, where you're getting points. But a lot of places like to offer you like a whole package where they try to rent you a car, do a flight and hotel and everything like that. So sometimes if you're just interested in the car points, like let's say, your rental, and that's the most important thing for you, depends what company you're doing with. But a lot of those websites, if you rent a car, then they'll say, oh, you're going to be in, I don't know, Atlanta. Would you also like a hotel there or something like that? Mm-hmm. And that's a way to gain points as well for something that's very specific that's maybe more important to you, whether it be a free hotel or car rental, or it depends, I guess, the projects. I've worked with some companies that actually do end up flying out because they had, military government-based contracts.
Right.
And they were based in Louisiana, so they always got flown out to a bunch of different places. And they were working with us on the border in New Mexico, so they got flown out not every week, because we did 10 days on, 4 days off. But there was flights there as well. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of hook into the points. It doesn't have to, like, your hotel points don't have to go towards hotels. You can figure out ways to work with like Enterprise or Alamo or any of those other big car rental places, or even some of the smaller ones.
I think what we're boiling down to here is, if you do have the ability to book your own lodging, if it's not taken out of your hands, because that's really what a lot of this comes down to. We're either speaking to field techs or we're speaking to project managers, depending on one of the two. It depends on how you frame it. But if you do have the ability to book your own lodging, man, I'm going to make a request to project managers that you start hooking up the field crew prior to the field project starting, because a lot of times you might know, a week ahead of time or something like that, who most of your field crew is going to be, and maybe get them on a single email chain and say, hey, here's an introductions. This is so and so. They're going to be in this position, rather than doing all those introductions the morning the project starts. Say, hey, here's all the people that are going to be on this project, and here's what their roles are going to be. And then now everybody has their own email addresses, and maybe they can start saying, hey guys, I found this Airbnb that's right near where we're meeting, and it's it meets all our requirements. Does anybody want to go in on this with me? And then maybe you can book that ahead of time or something like that. I've never seen that before, and I'm literally just making this up off the top of my head, but I think that would be a fantastic idea personally. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's where a lot of these sort of travel nightmares from both the field directors, crew chiefs, and the techs come from, is that in too many cases, I've been on way too many projects where the project starts on Monday, the travel day is on Sunday, the crew is settled on Thursday night, travel is booked and thought about for the very first time on Friday. Yeah. And so you got folks running around on Friday trying to find last minute cheap accommodations with only 48-hour notice. Right. On these things. There's been plenty of times where I'm having to have awkward conversations with like prospective field techs, like, hey, we need you to go out to West Virginia next week. Where? What's going to be out in this little small town? Where are we staying? I don't know. We'll get back to you on that. Yeah. So I think that's where a lot of these because unfortunately, in sort of the project management ideas of too many firms, travel is sort of seen as like the last bit of the bit thing to worry about, because it's not and at least in a lot of people's mind, it's not directly associated with the project. It has nothing to do with making sure you have your equipment or making sure the site has been evaluated and what your testing strategy is going to be, or how many days of actual field work are you going to need on it. It's sort of this supplementary thing on the background, because we haven't gotten to the point yet where drones can go out into the field and do all the work for us. So we actually have to hire humans, and thinking about humans and their human needs is unfortunately seen as one of the last things that gets thought about. And it's not always even the project manager's fault. It's the client who's like, wants to get all these other things in place. And sometimes you're not signing, your paperwork to agree to do this project until like Wednesday afternoon, with an agreement that you're going to be in the field by Monday. So you can't hire your crew yet because you don't have anything signed guaranteeing you're going to have a project for them. So I'm not even blaming like the PMs on this one. It's sort of I am blaming this entire damn industry for this one. But I think that leads to a lot of these horror stories, because make a lot of last second decisions. You stay in the place, which is like, dealing meth and having prostitution in places. I'm not even exaggerating. I've stayed at these hotels. There was one morning it was middle of winter. I still got up at 5, checked out of the hotel, 5 a.m. in the morning, checked out of the hotel, went to the field, even though sunrise wasn't going to be for another 3 hours, because a night worker and her prospective client were having a large conversation about their deal in the hallway that woke me up in the middle of the night. And I'm like, yep, nope. And I was by myself doing a cell tower project. So I was like, yeah, nope, I'm out of here. So, but that was because it was one of these projects where I'm told that this was even worse. I was basically told I have to go out the next day. And can you find a cheap place? And this is your budget. And it's always, when you say it like that, it's always a somewhat realistic thing. Like you keep talking about these numbers like $60, $70 an hour. We're like living in the DC, Baltimore area. The only places you'd find with that would be the kind of place that they're going to be doing illicit activities out there. It's more like the $120, $150, $200 a night places around here, unless you have do enough long-term studying and negotiations and have time and things like that. So, that would be my sort of, I think a lot of this frustration from crew, and it goes, and it sets the tone wrong right from the beginning for a crew. If you want a crew to feel salty to your company, put them in a crappy hotel. Give them a last, or even just give them the anxiety of, I need to pack and I'm leaving on Sunday and I'm have to wait till an email Sunday morning to tell me where I even have to go. Some people are cool with sort of that really fast and loose stuff. And I know I'm not. I like to know everything's in order and things and have things planned and think things out. So that kind of stuff causes anxiety for me. So it's not cool having that kind of stuff. So, sort of wrap all those, to wrap everything back into the world of CRM. I think the big lesson here is that there's a lot of cool things, a lot of good options out there for travel, and travel needs to be taken seriously. If your project requires your crew to travel someplace and to stay a place, that needs to be a top priority then. That needs to be part of your logistical plan from the very beginning, is not just what are they going to do in the field, but how are we going to get them there and where are they going to be staying? All need to be thought about from the beginning rather than, okay, we got the signed paperwork, we got a notice to proceed, let's go round up whoever we can, and then after we do that, we'll find a cheap hotel, and then we'll go.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good point that you've raised, Bill, is also health and safety. I mean, that's when you start doing it on your own, finding a place to stay, there's this sort of health and safety that you're talking about, Bill, where you don't want to be with the meth heads and the prostitutes, but even just health and safety sort of stuff inside crews as well. It's why I'm always a bit hesitant about sort of sharing rooms just in general for privacy stuff, but also sort of that Airbnb, because if you have a fairly large crew, chances are at some point someone's going to get angry at someone else. It's the nature of field work. And then you also have that issue of, harassment. So if you're being harassed by someone on the crew, you want to be able to go back to your own room and own space and be able to, avoid that person. But sometimes if, they start cramming everyone into a single house or whatever to have everyone, you don't get that escape. And that's particularly bad, for all sorts of harassment, but even just sometimes on crew cohesion, it happens. You have maybe a 12-hour day, you're out in the sun, someone says something, it just pisses you off, you snap at them, they snap back at you, and then you guys, you cool off and it gets taken care of later. But if you're stuck in the same living space, confined, that can make the situation worse. And then even with hotels and stuff, it's always, I remember we were on one project where mysteriously we all got put in rooms next to each other, except for one young lady who happened to be the youngest person on the crew, and the hotel person put them basically on the other end of the hotel and closer to the office. It was really creepy. Is basically what happened. And we just said, no, we're all going to have rooms together or you're not going to have us. And so they moved the person over. But you do have to sort of think about that sort of issues of, when you are bunking a bunch of people, one, will they get along? But two, if something goes wrong or something happens to someone at the hotel, where, are they going to have to go next door or 3 floors up to find you, or whoever else is in charge and needs to be able to handle those issues?
That's totally true. I mean, especially these small towns. I mean, you can't trust some of the hotel clerks, even like you said, Doug, where to place people, even based on recommendations. But, one thing both of you guys are alluding to here is really just advanced planning. And, the first time the hotel situation in a town should be looked at, if the company doesn't have familiarity with that town. I mean, a lot of times out here in Nevada, we only have a few towns to choose from. So if you're like, oh, I've got a project near Battle Mountain, like I pretty much know what the deal is in Battle Mountain. I know what the hotels are. I know what they cost. I don't have to look at Elko. I know what the hotels are. I know what they cost, things like that. But if you're going to someplace new, when you're bidding that project and there's one thing that when you're bidding a project, the size of it and you know where it's at. Because if you didn't know those two things, you wouldn't be able to bid the project. So just the fact that you know those two pieces of information means that you can also decide, okay, this is how many people I need based on the size and the time frame. This is how many people I need. This is going to have to be either the town that we're staying in or the camping situation that we're in or whatever the deal is. This is what it's going to be. Therefore, here's what I have to put in the project for per diem requirements or lodging requirements if you're not doing per diem or something like that, and say this is going to be a line item cost, and then always add 20% just in case, and when you do that. So that's the first time. Now, depending on how big your company is, that might be a business developer that's doing that. That might be somebody whose only job is to write proposals. But this is why companies should have everything in sort of shared resources with a definite folder structure that can be easy to follow. Because by the time this project is won and then it's handed to a project manager to deal with, they should be able to look back through the proposal history and say, okay, so it's out here. They bid this much. Now I have to go find these things. And one of the reasons, just so field techs know, one of the reasons you often don't find out where you're going to be until a few days before the project is because a lot of times the notice to proceed is only a few days out, and you can't actually book the hotel rooms 2 weeks in advance. Because if you do that, if you book it in advance, 9 times out of 10, the start date's going to change. And now you got to call the hotel, deal with all that. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what we should do. But if you don't call within enough time, then they get really pissed and they might charge you anyway. But you've got to do all those planning things, which what this really all boils down to, guys, and I'm going to say it again, is field techs should be able to find their own lodging. Just tell them they're getting $150 a day or $100 a day, whatever gets them enough food and lodging support, and let them figure it out. And then they can go find their stuff. They can use their own points-bearing credit card to purchase a hotel room and deal with changing it if they want to. And you hire professionals. You say, listen, our meeting point is here at 7 o'clock every day. You've got, most companies give you 1 or 2 strikes for not showing up on time, and just not just archaeology companies, but every company. And if you don't show up when and where you're supposed to be without a phone call, you don't say like, hey, I got a flat tire or something like that, then that's a no-call, no-show. Even if you're late, it's a no-call, no-show at the time you were supposed to be there. And you only get, maybe 1 or 2 of those, maybe 3 at a company, and then you're fired. That's all there is to it. There's plenty of people that can be here to take your place in less than 24 hours, and jump on the Archaeo Field Techs group in Facebook and say, hey, I need somebody over here now, and you'll probably get somebody. So that's my thing. Just give them the money and have them deal with it themselves, because then they can choose whatever they want, and most of these problems go out the door. So I don't know. Where are we standing on all this, guys? What's our final verdict here?
I think it'll depend on the person. I think, at least for you and I, Chris, and maybe Bill as well, we would prefer to source our own accommodation, because we've talked about points and, it helps pay for our holidays. It's a great thing, but that's not for everyone. Some people just want to be able to have it taken care of. They just want to show up. They don't care about the points. They just want to be able to say, I need to be at this accommodation at this time and everything's taken care of. I don't have to do anything. Maybe I have to sign in to get my key, and that's the most I have to do. So I think it's a bit more complicated in that it really depends on who's on your crew and who the person is, which I guess is a big punt on my part. I'm sorry. That's basically like saying, hey guys, it's complicated.
Okay, well then I'll take the opposite view. Then I'm going to go towards I still think the company should handle it, because more often than not, even with the information ahead of time, most of your field crew isn't really going to focus on what the project is until they're actually in the field. They're not, in terms of like understanding we're going to be out here 10 hours a day. That doesn't really sink in until they're actually standing in the field and working and going, oh, this is what we were supposed to be doing out here. I just got a call saying I showed up for work, and I showed up for work. So without those sort of other factors in play, I don't necessarily know if I would trust their decision-making in terms of finding what's going to be the best location for the project. Now, the opposite is also true. If it's somebody up in HR who's handling traveling for the entire big corporation, they also aren't thinking about what's best for the project. They're thinking what's best for the bottom line. I like it when there's somebody on the project in some sort of management view putting out there. Now, with that being said, if rooms are sort of small and there maybe is a couple accommodations, giving some flexibility to the crew and going, hey, our main hotel is going to be here, but since in your scenario, Chris, you're paying for your own lodging. Here is another one or two options that are also close by that you may also want to look at too. So it's sort of the compromise view. It's the project manager sort of making the decision, but maybe gives one or two choices to the crew to sort of make them feel more comfortable with the project.
Right. Okay, well, let's wrap up this episode then. I'll just give one final thought on all this. I think in the end, in fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday about some situations he had with a few companies he'd worked with, and it really disheartened him because really all their agreements were verbal over the phone. And you need to have stuff in writing, basically, is what this comes down to. If you're happy with double occupancy in a small hotel room, that's great. But make sure you don't find that out on the day that you show up to the project, right? When you're called to come on, usually almost all the time there's a phone call, unless you've got a long history with the company. Then they might just email you and say, hey, can you come out on this project? But even then, find out everything. And even if that writing it doesn't have to be official company letterhead, although that would be nice. It can just be an email, right? Emails are permissible and admissible in a lot of legal situations these days. And if they say, listen, here's what your lodging is going to be, here's what your per diem is going to be, here's the situation, here's, the town we're going to be in, here are some options, all that stuff, just ask them for it. Just ask them for it. And if you have it, you have it, then you're going to be done.
Absolutely. That's absolutely needed for any tech out there. Get that stuff in writing about your whole project.
That's right. And I think I'll add to the Team Black video list that I'm creating, educating people about point systems and things like that, because like both of you guys said, people just don't know all this stuff. They don't know all these things. And I think one of the big benefits of being a field technician and being in this job is all the extras you can get if you know how to kind of game the system, right? I mean, take advantage of the type of job that we have here and go from there. You see other big companies and they're giving people retirement education and, things like that. So they understand how to invest in their 401k and all those things. Well, we should be doing that as archaeology companies and telling people how to best, live their best lives as field techs and get everything they can from it. All right. Well, I think that's it for this week. Thanks, guys. And we'll be back next week with possibly a special guest who's doing a side hustle. And we'll talk to him about that. He's also an archaeologist, but he's from Australia and working here in California. And he was going to be on today, but I just couldn't pull it together in time. So I think that's going to be next time. So otherwise, if you want a guest on the show, talk about what you're doing, just kind of be a co-host with us, a guest co-host, then email me, Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. And we'll see you next week. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question in a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Whoa, that was just like a normal goodbye.
I know. I thought I'd throw it up, mix it up for once, Chris, because, I've always done something different for so long. I'm running out of, well, actually, I'm not running out of things to do, but, some variety to your life.
I thought I had an echo because I was hearing feedback at the same time I was talking. I'm like, what's that noise?
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.